Ruthless Compassion is a podcast about how you can turn your emotional shit into fertilizer for success and see your darkest moments as opportunities to transform into a powerful kindness warrior. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review wherever you listen. Hi there, this is Dr. Marcia Sirota with the Real Mental Podcast. My guest today is a repeat offender, Jason Anderson, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation about the movie Turning Red.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really delighted to have you again because we had such a great conversation the first time we spoke. That's why I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful conversation today.
And I'm always happy to talk about Turning Red. It's sorry to jump the gun on the film, but it's a great occasion.
So let's talk about it. Like, what did you like about it in particular?
Well, I mean, it certainly was big news in Toronto because it's the most unabashedly Torontonian Hollywood production maybe ever, and it's certainly a kind of bit of a love letter to Toronto, circa 2002, when the film is set. And even like, I mean, I was watching it again last night, and even like it's great to see all the stuff that they actually just throw in the movie and don't actually explain. Like the repeated use of the word loony, and I'm like, all right, it's kind of refreshing that you'll throw in, actual Canadian money and slang for it without actually having to explain it. Um, but it's such a terrific film, and I think it was a bit. I mean, it's great that it's had the success because it was a bit disappointing, I think, for a lot of people, especially in Toronto when it kind of came out during the pandemic and went straight to streaming outside of a couple of screenings because it was unfortunate because of that timing, because I think it could have been one of those. I would have loved to have gone to a movie theater to see it with my daughter, especially since she's kind of coming into the age of the characters. So it's a good. I think I say it was especially popular. I think also with parents of, like, my daughter's friends who I know, because it is, I think very, very it does that thing where it's very specific and very universal, because it kind of keys in on this particular period of kind of early adolescence and girlhood in a way that I think is really astute and very engaging, and but beyond that, it's just really funny and quite delightful all the way through. So I think it is something that I think a great illustration that you can actually have, really kind of pretty sophisticated themes, very cultural specificity, both in Toronto, especially having a Chinese Canadian family as the center of it, and and all this that you realize it adds so much texture and richness to the story, and yet at the same time, it's still like, there's kind of entry points for all kinds of people. And I think that was something important too, in terms of representation, to sort of show that, okay, you can have a you know 13-year-old Chinese Canadian protagonist in the year 2002 in Toronto, and make it very particular to these sorts of circumstances and experience. And yet, it really is got a lot for any kind of viewer to delight in, I think.
Well, let's break it down, okay? Let's start talking about it in more specific terms. So, I was thinking about, how the movie begins, and you're seeing this young girl, this, tween, early teen girl, and she has put aside all of her wishes and needs and desires, and she is trying her very best to please her mother, who is extremely demanding and extremely rigid and unyielding. And this little girl is twisting herself into a pretzel to please this mother, and giving up all the things she wants. And I thought that that was a very interesting beginning of the film. What did you make of that?
Yeah, and that's all very true. And I think one important thing about that dynamic is it's not combative. Like, that's something I think you
Yeah.
see this kind of even in otherwise really good kind of mother-daughter focused animations. Like, I think about Brave, which was a sort of predecessor film, and I think a bit of a certainly a pioneering in its have in the use of kind of priority, showing that family relationship. But for instance, in that relationship, much more combative, much more sort of like, much, not huge animosity, but certainly this one I think is a fundamentally sort of loving and caring, although still very demanding relationship. I mean, and that intensity in terms of the need of approval that May, the girl, and that what she seeks from her mother,
Hmm.
um, like it's very present, very upper mind, but it's not like in a sort of, I think it would be an easier thing to sort of present it in very kind of negative terms, or like the girls being sort of browbeaten, or sort of, I mean, it's I mean, they actually have a lot of fun together.
Yeah.
So it's not like, and they joke, and it's a very kind of loving dynamic at the same time that it is, obviously a thing that is kind of putting her in pretzels and creating a lot of
Yeah.
pressure.
Yeah, there's no resentment on her part, which is interesting because her mother is so difficult. But, she doesn't see it, at least not at the beginning. She thinks this is her normal, and her friends are all rolling their eyes about it, but she accepts it at the start, which I think is a very interesting beginning, right? Like right at the start, this is fine for her.
Yeah, I think it's a very, and then again, it's a very like psychologically astute thing, because it doesn't have to. I mean, a lot of these things kind of, a lot of that sort of dynamics between mothers and daughters. I mean, that can exist within like a fundamentally sort of loving, kind of positive thing as well, even even if it has a lot of these repercussions, and certainly it creates a lot of pressure in that character. Um, but I think that's, and that's something that kind of, I mean, it's you definitely see what the that what's going on in that relationship. And I think that kind of comes into stark relief when you start to see the grandmother and May's mother in their
Yes.
dynamic, and what's going on between them. You realize that this has been set up kind of in, there's a
Yes.
pairing of parental dynamics here, which becomes very interesting through the film too.
For sure. Well, I wanted to talk about the inciting incident, which is May's crush on this young guy who works in a convenience store. And she's like writing in her journal about him. And then mom discovers it. And the thing I found so psychologically astute, to use your word, is how mom cannot believe that her precious, innocent little daughter could have these feelings. And she immediately assumes that this young man is up to no good, and she goes to confront him because it couldn't possibly be her daughter. And I thought that was so accurate, that this mother is so, I don't want to say deluded, but has such a fixed idea of who her daughter is, that there's no room to conceive of the possibility that her daughter is not exactly the way she thinks she is.
That's it. I mean, I think that's another good point, because you realize, I mean, I think everyone in a family, it's these sort of closest relationships you have, especially when you're a kid, you look at each other and see each other in very particular ways that may not have much to do with reality sometimes, and certainly aren't, that flexible a lot of the time too. And so when change like this happens, it's, I think you just see, I mean, that scene with the mother confronting the hapless teenage clerk who she thinks has sort of corrupted her daughter. I mean, kid has no idea what's going on, because it's just, I mean, the mother is not, I mean, it's just completely, you know there's no way she's going to sort of even kind of start to compute that this is thing. And that's really funny, because I think, like, I mean, certainly the movie, I mean, this sort of, the central premise and metaphor, I mean, certainly there's a read that this is about puberty, and it's about, she was having her first menstruation, and it's funny, because even, and that it's but one thing I think is really funny is that it's also like lust, and that's actually something I really like about the movie too, especially within the context of a sort of Disney movie for preteens. That it's actually really open about the sort of the beginning of desire and crushes, and and how confusing it is to May when she starts to have these feelings for
Yeah.
boys, and there's this great device of having, I mean, which is again very appropriate to the period, but this sort of fake boy band, sort of Backstreet Boys in sync band called Four Town, whose songs are fantastic, I must say. Those are,
Yes.
I mean, mostly written by Billie Eilish's brother, who was a great songwriter, and it's like completely, the song, sort of the homage to sort of early 2000s boy band pop is immaculate. But yeah, like, and those guys, and that's how that stuff was sold in the first place was sort of exactly to this audience and stirrings of, of desire and lust in this very young audience in a way that I think the film deals with quite frankly, and actually, in a kind of really open and positive way too. It's not an embarrassing thing, even though it is, of course, very embarrassing to May at times when her mother starts to catch wind of it.
Yeah, and I liked the fact that, turning red we could think of as, getting angry, but I think it's finding that wildness inside. So lust and desire and rage and jealousy and rebellion and all those quote unquote negative emotions that this mother is working so hard within herself and toward her daughter to repress. And the panda, then emerges that night after mom goes and confronts the boy, and May is horrendously humiliated. And boom, her shadow, all the darkness, quote unquote, inside of her emerges. And then the question is, what are they going to do with all this, Pandora's box that has been opened, right?
Yeah, and that's it. And it is great. It's a great, kind of metaphor. And I think that's something we really, really appreciate about, fantastic stories and allegories where you can sort of literalize. I was going to say literalize the monster, but it's not a monster. I mean, it's certainly just this kind of, kind of Freudian id, but it's really just kind of this. It's the
Yeah.
sort of unruly yourself, and it is a kind of a sort of stand-in for all kinds of things. Certainly, it's a stand-in for adulthood, and sort of passage from sort of this whatever passes for childhood innocence, which is a bit of an overrated concept anyway. But certainly when you kind of get into the sort of you know kind of unrulier energies of teenagehood and adulthood, but also just it's like an important part of the self that I think is certainly the conflict here is that it is something that has been repressed within the family, repressed especially within the female members of the family for many
Yeah.
generations, and it definitely conflicts with the sort of need to control and conform and be a certain way because it is none of those things.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention one thing, which is that it also represents power, right? That these
Hmm.
pandas, these red pandas that these women transform into are powerful beings. And when May is in her panda form, she's powerful, and she got really angry at the school bully, I think Tyler, right? This kid,
Hmm.
she goes to his party. She agrees to go to the party because they're trying to get money to go to the concert. And a concert she never would have uh, decided to go to against her mother's wishes until the panda came out and she started finding those stirrings of rebellion within her. So she goes to Tyler's, fancy house to put on her panda performance, but Tyler is insulting to her family, and she flies into a rage and she scares him. Like she really scares him, and then she realizes what the power is in this panda and what she's capable of, and that scares her. And I think that's also very psychologically true because when we discover our own power, it can scare us too.
Very much so, and I think that's kind of and that's something when the, when our mom and her grandma talk about like, okay, we're gonna, you can't be the bear before we
Yeah.
do the big ritual to get rid of your bear because it's just going to get stronger and stronger, and you can see that that's sort of what's happening is the sort of that the the embrace of that kind of power or that kind of uh I was going to say aggression, but actually kind of a positive aggression,
Yeah.
certainly a force within. But that's the with that, it's also when you accept that sort of unrulier, bigger energies, they are not necessarily within your control, and they may, may lead to acts or behaviors that are, cause regret or it get you in trouble in all kinds of ways. And I think that's something really interesting about what how the movie is sort of talking about power and specifically, power for these female characters.
Right.
And another interesting thing is that I was thinking about how even the mother and grandmother who have done the ritual and captured their bears, they're still very powerful women. Like it's actually there isn't this sort of transformation where these women have become meek or kind of repressed. Or I mean they're very formidable women
Yes.
with their pandas captured in their medallion. So it's to see that too, where there really is and and even when within the May's family structure, I mean, her father's very sweet, but clearly not the one running the household, or his life in any way. So, and that's totally fine. He doesn't seem to mind that at all. So,
Yeah, and he has his own power because when he is supportive to her and he's encouraging to her, that's a very powerful moment for her to make her feel entitled to be true to herself. He says, be true to yourself, and she takes that on. So I think it's really showing balance, right? It's the movie is talking about, how to find balance. It's not about repressing or rejecting the parts of ourselves that we are uncomfortable with, but it's trying to integrate them and find balance in them as opposed to saying, I can't have this because there's a potential consequence that I wouldn't feel comfortable with.
right, and that's it. Like, I think that's something you get this, and that's very much May's journey, and really kind of just sort of for her to kind of, I mean, initially be very, shameful and scared by that transformation. But then, of course, when she and her friends realize the sort of, potentially, monetary value of the transformation, and this being this red panda has definite advantages. So, I mean, but very gradually, she's kind of realizing that she likes that power. She likes that kind of side of her. She likes that kind of more forthright, you know and again, that's not like she starts from this place of kind of misery, and she seems like, a from the start, she's a very kind of well adjusted and, kind of motivated kid who has friends and has a loving family. And so she's not sort of coming from a place of obvious lack, right? She's not coming from a place where she is who needs that power in a really sort of desperate way because she's in a bad place in her existence. So I think that's important, that she's, her start points actually, compared to a lot of kids, pretty good. But she's also like able to kind of embrace this other part of herself, and see its value, and kind of get rid of, and kind of be independent, and kind of be more herself, and even if she's okay, or happy enough under the sort of thumb of her mother, that she also needs to assert herself and be her own person in a way that also doesn't, hopefully, I mean, I was gonna say doesn't destroy your family, but it does kind of destroy your family. That's the end of the movie. I mean, that's the sort of big climactic sequences, because I think that, and that's really makes such a, I mean, because I think watching the movie again, there is that scene where May goes to the ritual, and she decides, no, I'm not, I'm gonna keep the bear. And that's like, she's kind of resolved herself. Like, she's reached that point where she's like, okay, I can take this on. I can be this more complete person by accepting this. But that, in fact, triggers triggers her mother, and triggers the unresolved, all that stuff sort of becomes the end of the film, is really less about May and more about what the mother's struggle has been.
Right. And it's interesting because the mom, her panda is, it's like a Godzilla size panda. It's like you can just think about how much her anger has been repressed for all these years, and how powerful it is, and how she had hurt her mother in her past, and was carrying around a lot of shame about that part of her. So I can see how, mom would be very fearful of May expressing her power because of her own guilt and shame about how she hurt her mom, the grandmother, with her power. So she's, buttoned up to her nose, and wants May to be the same. But May's panda is not her panda. Like her rage, her power is not the same as mom's, and mom has a really hard time, and this is also very psychologically true, separating her daughter from herself and seeing her daughter as an individual with her own attributes and her own strengths and weaknesses. And so she is just putting that thumb down, as you said, on her daughter, and they have this big conflict. And of course, you know, everybody has to rally together to get mom's panda back under control, because mom's panda really cannot be allowed to live free. It's just too destructive. But that doesn't mean that May's panda is the same. And I think that's a really great lesson, in terms of psychology and in terms of family dynamics, to see that a child is not necessarily, exactly the same as their parent, and they are their own person, and they shouldn't be treated the same way.
Yeah, it's fun. It's so smart because you think about what the sort of generational change. I mean, what the difference is for the three generations of women in the film. What kind of what their pandas have meant to them or how they've manifested and just the kind of that shift. And I don't think any of them really have kind of I mean, he's obviously in the best in some of these things that the others not. But certainly, I mean, when you start to see and that's another great smart thing about the film is when the mother's when whose name was Ming, when Ming sort of when she starts to kind of crumble with the grandmother around, and the pressure really, I mean, she's this kind of very kind of well put together and you know um kind of controlled person, and then when she starts to sort of dissemble and finally erupt in rage, and you realize that this is that she has been what she has been carrying this whole time, and but but in and to see that what the panda what that means to her. I mean, it's not just the panda, it's all the sort of guilt and shame about what has happened, what the impact of that on her relationship, how that kind of cost her relationship with her mother. And so all of that's it's a big volatile thing that kind of erupts in the last part of the film that I think it's kind of I think surprising. I think if you kind of come in there expecting this to be solely about this kind of 13-year-old girl's sort of journey, it's like, well, no, it's actually it's actually sort of like a couple of generations of women who really are kind of going through this at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about this fear of female power, right? And the mother is definitely afraid that her daughter will, be unruly in the way that she was, or wild, or dangerous. And ironically, when you think of the grandma did not hold a grudge against her daughter. Despite what had happened between them and how Ming had hurt her mom, the grandma did not carry this anger. And I think the mom's shame was so strong that she couldn't see that her mother has forgiven her and that her daughter is a separate person. So mom was so locked in her own shame, which creates a lot of rigidity, and that's so psychologically true, that she really couldn't see that it was okay between her and her mother, and she didn't have to feel so bad about herself, and also that she didn't need to try to control her daughter so much, because her daughter was not at risk of doing the same thing as she had done, and wouldn't have to carry the guilt and shame. So it's I think that's so true, the way we get so angry at ourselves for having messed up, that we can just become blind and really lose sight of the reality around us. And I think that's where Ming that was where she got into trouble. And I think at the end of the movie, she can forgive herself, right? She can come to
Mhm.
terms with her past, and not be so hard on herself. And then, of course, that enables her to ease up on her daughter May.
Again, it's such a lovely thing to actually sort of have that all sort of transpiring within a Disney Pixar family
I
film, which
know.
is because again really like kind of thorny areas within family dynamics, and I think that's something that I'm really happy about as a parent myself, to see this sort of representation, not just culturally in terms of a sort of the diversity of background and heritage, but also just kind of like that there's that kind of to see parents in this way, and to see, because I mean, I think kids have, I think the kind of degree of sort of nuance in portrayals of young characters. I think that's been, I think we've been in a good place for that for a while in terms of kind of what you're seeing, but to actually see parents and adults within these stories be as kind of flawed and interesting and vulnerable. I think that these are all pretty new things in terms of a kind of a mainstream, kind of Hollywood cinema.
Yeah, they're complex characters who have their own points of pain and their own needs for resolution. And going back to the dad character, he is kind of a secondary character. It really is a film about women and their wildness. But the dad is an interesting character because he loves his wife and he loves his daughter, and he sees, the dad actually sees what's going on, and he's just quietly observing and supporting. And I think that that's such a great role because, you know, dads often have a, you know, a stereotyped role. And I think it's lovely, again, psychologically, to see another option for a father to be quietly supportive of his wife and quietly supportive of his daughter. And when they need him, he steps up. You know, when May needed him to give her an emotional boost, he did. And when his wife needed him to help her transform back into, you know, her human form, he helped as well. So he stepped up when he needed to, and he was quiet when, you know, the rest of the time. And I thought that was a great portrayal of a different kind of dad and different kind of husband.
Yeah, I think that's like it's really uh lovely to see that, and to actually again not to see. I mean, I think the traditional or sort of stereotypical thing is to kind of paint, one as weak, or just kind of weak or meek or just deficient in some way, to kind of have that more of a hierarchy or a sort of simpler set of power dynamics in effect. And it's not like it tends to be not how a lot of a lot of families, and I mean everything's going to be shifting, and certainly you have different personality types within a family structure, and people finding a way to be there for each other, or to be kind of valuable to each other and supportive of each other in ways that aren't like like kind of alpha beta kind of dynamics, or simple ones, and then that's a really good illustration of that, because the father is kind of he's where he needs to be for these two very volatile women in his family.
Yeah, and it's a smart choice on his part because it enables him to be with them and to be loving with them without, you know, inciting more conflict. And I, you know, it could be considered the intelligent choice, right?
Yeah, I think that some of that same stuff is the same thoughtfulness is extended to May's circle of friends too, who are I think this girl gang that is
Yeah.
very and I think with them, obviously they have their own kind of, I mean, they're very united in their plan to get tickets to go see Four Town, but they have their things, and there's a really kind of one of those affecting moments for me is the moment where Tyler's party has kind of become a disaster, and she's attacked Tyler, and the mom does she does the same thing she did to the clerk earlier by sort of accusing the friend of being responsible for what has happened here, when really it's on May, or as much on May as them.
Yeah.
And she sides with the mother, and she just kind of burned, she, as one of the friends
Right.
said, you threw us under the bus, and she burned her friends on it. But like in and but you can and she like and I think that they, I mean, they're there's hurt feelings, but like you can really see when they kind of reconcile. It's like they understand what happened. Like they all understand what happened in that moment. It was very sad and it hurt, but everyone understood. May understood, like friends understood, like what had happened, and they were willing to sort of accept that and reconcile, because it. And I think that was a really lovely and moving kind of thing to say about that kind of friendship, especially at that age. And again, like I've seen a lot of these sorts of stories before, and instead, like the easier thing from a sort of screenwriter perspective is to sort of foster the conflict, and to have things be unforgivable. And it's like, oh no, like kids know. And I think that's and May, in that situation, she regrets kind of burning her friends and siding with her mother, and but she's kind of and again, that moment, she doesn't have the power to stand up, and it's just too painful to stand
Yeah.
up, and the friends, I think, are quick to recognize that and move on.
Yeah, her friends understand how much she values her mother's approval, how much she needs her mother's approval, and how when she misbehaved, that shame that her mother has, you know, always held over her head. Like, if you're a bad girl, you're going to feel shame. And I think, of course, that's her mother projecting her own shame, Ming projecting her own shame onto May, because Ming is carrying shame for her bad behavior in the past. So, you know, May has behaved badly, and then she, you know, immediately feels that profound shame. And the only way to fix it is to get her mother's approval. And so when mother blames the other friends, you know, that's May's out. And so, of course, she goes along with it because, you know, anything better than to have that profound shame. And the kids understand that, you know, her pal, her girl gang understands how they might not understand all the psychological ramifications of the dynamic, but they understand how important it is that May has her mother's, okay, right? And so they're able to let it go because probably they themselves, have their own relationships with their mothers that they are working through. And so, they're more able to understand and forgive. And I think you're right. I think instead of going for that cheap conflict, the filmmakers are going for the deeper psychological nuances, which make it much more meaningful and
Yeah.
more enjoyable, actually. And I think it's a testament to the courage of the filmmakers to see that you don't have to just keep regurgitating the same old tropes. You can try something more sincere, more meaningful, more psychologically astute, and audiences will eat it up.
I think, and that's it. Like, I think it really is a testament to that kind of quality. And it's not that, I mean, it really, I mean, I mean, it's up for best animated feature, but I think it's as well written, as anything in the writing categories. Just, kind of just because, and I think that's something that maybe, kind of when you get to the big award season, and the Oscars, I mean, you tend to reward the sort of serious, more obvious sort of grown up fare. But it's like, I think it's harder to write well for children, harder to write well and it's harder to write comedy too. Like, it's harder to write this stuff that's this kind of funny and breezy and engaging, but sort of has this kind of depth, And so I think this is what Domi Shi, the filmmaker, who's Chinese Canadian and grew up in Toronto, which is why it's all very Torontonian. Like, I think it's a really terrific, and you can tell it's one of these things. I think, kind of, obviously, with animated features, when they're good, they're often very, very good because of just how long and how much work it takes to make one of these. So I think you can really tell this is a script and a story that has been fine tuned and enriched greatly over this long process of making the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an incredibly well-written film and it's got such depth, as you said, and it's talking about themes that are psychologically very, very interesting and very meaningful and very, like you said in the beginning, universal. So anybody, who's growing up or anybody who's a parent, could reflect on their own wildness, their own power, their own rebelliousness, and how they have found a way to integrate or not these attributes into their personality. And what happens when you reject those parts of yourself, and what happens when you accept that those parts are natural and okay, and how you can be a whole person when you are able to integrate those things. And I think that's like such a important psychological message, and she is expressing it without hitting you over the head, without
Hmm.
being didactic, without it being like this like diatribe, this boring rant.
Yep.
She makes it funny, she makes it quirky, she makes it sweet, and yet she's talking about like really heavy important stuff. So wow, that's impressive, to get this very important psychological message across in such a sweet and humorous way. That's a feat.
Big time. Yeah, I think, like, and as a parent of a girl around
Yeah.
this age, it's enormously appreciated to sort of have this kind of, just this kind of representation to show this sort of experience, to show kind of what this, in a fun way that isn't like, kind of, that is it's not going to feel educational. We're going to feel therapeutic. It just feels like, a very fun, engaging, moving movie.
Yeah, I guess that's the best kind of art, is the kind of art that you just enjoy for its own sake. And then, you're left with some important things to think about and to consider without feeling like you've just been fed a lesson.
Exactly. Yeah.
We were talking about the Fablemans in our first conversation, and in that sense, it reminds me of that movie. Turning Red does, because they both have these very profound messages that they're expressing, but they're doing them in ways that are very light and not didactic. Not hitting you over the head, so you don't even realize that you've learned something until afterwards when you think about it or you're talking about it. And I think that really is the best of art. And I think The Fablemans was also nominated, wasn't it?
It is, yeah, and Marie
Yeah.
Evans is done,
So
yeah, so and actually,
yeah.
it's I mean, actually, one thing I know we could talk about, certainly about sort of, representation of a sort of Chinese diasporan family with,
Yeah.
mother-daughter things, Everything Everywhere All at Once is rich with this sort of a lot of these sort of same themes are sort of very present in that, but treated, and again, in a completely different way, and as this sort of wild science fiction action comedy, but I mean, it's we could definitely. I mean, a lot of what we just said about Turning Red could apply to that movie too. And in fact, it actually this Michelle Yeoh has this, voices the role of the grandmother in that movie. She's the mother, just plays the mother and everything everywhere. So it's there's a lot of connectivity with quite a few movies, and certainly I mean, these are great versions of family stories. I think in ways that feel very fresh.
Yeah, it makes me hopeful that for the future we'll be able to have more TV shows and films that are able to, you know, explore these really profound psychological themes, but in a way that doesn't feel like we're at the school lesson getting like a documentary that's like dry as cardboard. I mean, documentaries can be very exciting, so I don't want to disparage documentaries, but I'm talking about those school ones that, it's like, "Oh my god, kill me now." So these are funny, these are light, these are engaging, these are universal, these are emotionally resonant, and yet we still get this huge impact of meaning and understanding of humanity, and I think that's a great thing.
Definitely.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to just add as a little postscript about this delightful movie before we sign off?
I think that I'm thrilled about it. I think that it's again, just to see. I mean, one thing actually, this is completely digressive, but the thing is, one thing somebody pointed out about the representation of Toronto in 2002 was that the film is realistic and it shows more parking lots. And I'm like, that's very true. Because I remember the city in 2002, before they put condos in every corner, there were many more parking lots. And I think the movie actually has a sort of a lower rise version of like certainly the Toronto skyline you see. And I'm like, oh, I'm a bit nostalgic for that. I mean, it's nice to have like lots of places for people to live, but there was a shape to the city that is now gone, that is kind of preserved somehow within this film, which I think is kind of another thing that may appreciate.
Yeah, it just shows the care of the filmmakers. They were really paying attention not just to the inner lives of the characters, but also to the world that they lived in and the culture that they were part of. And that kind of care and attention to detail is lovely to see and inspiring. I think it's a nice extra little touch.
Very much so.
Well, Jason, where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about who you are and what you do?
Certainly, my writing pops up in recent issues of Sight and Sound magazine and Cinema Scope magazine and Broadview magazine, a lot of which you'll find in print. I'm always excited to write for print because I think I like to have I like to as a physical object somewhere in the world as opposed to just living digitally. But yeah, and certainly I'm excited about all those things.
Well, the Academy Awards are coming up, so it's going to be fun to see if the films we've discussed, come up with any awards. But in the meantime, we'll keep watching and we'll keep talking about different creative endeavors.
Terrific. I look forward to the next time.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason. And this is Dr. Marcia Sirota talking with Jason Anderson about the wonderful film Turning Red, which is still available on streaming platforms. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thank you for listening. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasorota.md.com, where you'll learn about upcoming online events as well. Also, we love getting referrals from our listeners about future podcast guests, so please email us at info@marciasorota.md.com.